The coffee in my mug had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept pretending to sip it anyway. Anything to avoid looking at Marcus Rivera as he launched into another one of his ridiculous war stories. The man pushed a mop around our office building for minimum wage, yet somehow expected us to believe he'd been some kind of elite soldier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. So there I was, pinned down by sniper fire in Fallujah, Marcus said, his weathered hands gesturing as he spoke to anyone unfortunate enough to be trapped in the break room with him. My unit was scattered, communications were down, and we had civilians trapped in the building next to us. I rolled my eyes so hard it hurt. Let me guess, I interrupted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You single-handedly took out the entire enemy position and saved everyone, right? Marcus's dark eyes met mine across the room. At 52, his face was lined with years of hard living, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed despite his humble position. He stood barely 5'8", his janitor's uniform hanging loose on his slight frame. Everything about him screamed ordinary. Not exactly, Mr. Patterson, he said quietly, using my last name with the same respect he showed everyone in the building, from the CEO to the newest intern. War isn't like the movies. Real heroes usually die, and the ones who come home. He paused, something flickering across his expression. They just try to find ways to keep living. Right, I snorted, loud enough for the other employees to hear. And I suppose you've got medals hidden in your janitor's closet? Maybe a purple heart mixed in with the toilet paper. A few people chuckled nervously. Marcus just nodded slowly and returned to wiping down the microwave. Something like that, he murmured. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Finally, I'd shut down his ridiculous fantasies. As the head of marketing for Meridian Financial, I dealt with facts, figures, and reality. I had no patience for some old janitors' desperate attempts to seem important. The truth was, Marcus irritated me more than he should have. Maybe it was because people actually listened to his stories, their faces softening with something that looked like respect. Maybe it was because he carried himself with a quiet dignity that my expensive suits and corner office couldn't seem to buy me. Or maybe it was just because, at 35, I was having my own crisis about what I'd accomplished with my life, and his presence reminded me that meaning couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. You know what I think? I announced to the room, riding the wave of my small victory. I think our friend Marcus here has watched one too many action movies. Next thing you know, he'll be telling us he was a Navy SEAL or something equally ridiculous. Marcus finished cleaning the microwave and turned to face me directly. For a moment, something shifted in his expression, a hardness that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. But then it passed, and he simply said, "We all have stories, Mr. Patterson. Some of us just choose when to tell them." I was about to fire back another cutting remark when my assistant, Janitor, burst through the break room door. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking. "There are men with guns in the lobby," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've locked down the building. Security is ... She swallowed hard. Security is dead. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. Through the break room's small window, I could see into the main office space. Our usual Friday afternoon routine had transformed into something from a nightmare. Employees crouched behind desks, some crying silently, others staring in shock at the elevator banks where armed figures in tactical gear had positioned themselves. "How many?" Marcus asked, his voice suddenly different, calm, focused, with an edge of authority I'd never heard before. I don't know," Janitor stammered. "At least 6. Maybe more." They came in through the loading dock and the main entrance at the same time. It was coordinated. I felt my legs go weak. Meridian Financial occupied floors 30 through 35 of the downtown high-rise. We were trapped 30 stories above the street with nowhere to run. "What do they want?" I managed to ask. "I don't think they've said yet," Jennifer replied. "But they're moving people into the main conference room. They have ... they have automatic weapons." Marcus had moved to the window and was studying the situation with the focused intensity of someone assessing a tactical problem. "6 visible in the main office," he murmured, more to himself than to us. "Standard breach pattern. They'll have overwatch positions and probably left someone to monitor." "The stairwells." I stared at him. "How do you, Jennifer?" Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Are there any other employees still in their offices? Anyone who might not know what's happening?" "Maybe a few people in the back offices," she said. "And Mr. Hendricks was in his office when it started. I don't know if he's—" "We need to get to them," Marcus said, already moving toward the door. "Keep people away from the windows and exits. These men aren't here for money. If they were, they'd have gone for the bank downstairs. This is something else." "Wait," I called. After him, my mind struggling to process what was happening. "You can't just go out there. They'll kill you." Marcus paused at the door and looked back at me. "Maybe," he said simply, "but I've been in worse situations than this." Before I could respond, he was gone, moving through the office with a cat-like silence I'd never noticed before. I watched through the window as he seemed to melt from shadow to shadow, staying low, using furniture and partitions for cover. "Is he insane?" I whispered to Jennifer, but even as I said it, I was watching Marcus move with a precision and skill that belonged in a different world than the one where he emptied trash cans and mopped floors. This wasn't the shuffling janitor I'd been mocking for months. This was someone else entirely. He reached the first occupied office without being seen. Through the glass partition, I watched him quietly alert the terrified accountant inside, then guide him toward a better position. The man's face showed confusion, then growing hope as Marcus whispered quick instructions. One of the gunmen turned in Marcus's direction, and I held my breath. But Marcus had already anticipated the movement. Dropping behind a desk just as the man's gaze swept the area, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown number. Stairwells are covered. Main elevators disabled. They're professionals, but they made mistakes. Stay in the break room until I come for you." Amy stared at the message. How had Marcus gotten my number? How was he moving through a hostage situation like he'd trained for it his entire life? Another text arrived. "Stop looking out the window. You're making yourself visible." I jerked back from the glass, my heart hammering. Jennifer grabbed my arm. "What's happening?" she whispered. Before I could answer, we heard voices from the main office. Clear, authoritative commands in accented English. "All employees move to conference room now. Do not resist, and you will not be harmed. We are here for specific information, not to hurt innocent people." Through the crack in the door, I could see people being herded toward the large conference room at the far end of the office. The gunmen were indeed professionals. They moved with military precision, covering each other, maintaining clear lines of sight. Their equipment was high-end, their tactics flawless, except Marcus was somehow moving through their perimeter like a ghost. I watched as he reached another group of employees, whispering quick instructions that seemed to calm their panic. Whatever he was telling them, they believed him. The same quiet authority that had irritated me in the break room now seemed to create pockets of hope in the midst of terror. My phone buzzed again. "They're looking for client files, probably industrial espionage or foreign intelligence. This isn't random. How could he possibly know that?" I was still processing the message when I saw Marcus do something that made my blood freeze. One of the gunmen had separated from the group, moving toward the back offices where several employees were still trapped. Marcus emerged from behind a partition and moved up behind the man with fluid, deadly silence. What happened next occurred so quickly I almost missed it. Marcus's hand shot out, covering the gunman's mouth while simultaneously applying pressure to his neck. The man's weapon clattered silently to the floor as his body went limp. Marcus lowered him carefully behind a desk, took his weapon, and checked his pulse. Still alive. Unconscious, but alive, Marcus quickly stripped the man's tactical vest and earpiece, putting them on as he studied the weapon with obvious familiarity. When he looked up, his eyes swept the office with the cold assessment of a predator. This wasn't Marcus the janitor anymore. This was someone who belonged in the world of violence and tactical operations. My phone buzzed. 5 left. Stay hidden. Through the window, I watched as the remaining gunmen began to realize something was wrong. Their leader, a tall man with a distinctive scar across his cheek, was speaking rapidly into his radio. "Contact lost with Dimitri," he announced to his team. "Sweep and clear. Someone's moving against us." They began to spread out, weapons ready, searching for their missing teammate. Their casual confidence had been replaced with professional wariness. Marcus had vanished again, but I could see the results of his presence. Employees were moving with purpose now instead of panic, following routes that kept them away from the gunman's sight lines. Someone had organized them, given them hope and direction. The tactical situation was shifting, and the invaders were beginning to realize they weren't dealing with ordinary office workers. "Contact," one of the gunmen shouted, raising his weapon toward a movement near the copy center. But Marcus wasn't where the man expected him to be. He emerged from a different angle, moving with the controlled violence of someone who had done this before. The gunman spun toward him, but Marcus was already inside his range, one hand deflecting the weapon while the other delivered a precise strike to the man's solar plexus. The gunman folded, gasping as Marcus relieved him of his weapon and restraints. Within seconds, the man was unconscious and secured behind a heavy desk. 4 left. The remaining gunmen were no longer hunting trapped civilians. They were being hunted themselves, and they knew it. "Who is this?" their leader demanded into his radio. "Intelligence said we were dealing with financial workers, not military personnel." Marcus's voice came from somewhere in the office, calm and clear. "Your intelligence was correct. You're dealing with financial workers. And one janitor who's having a very bad day." I felt a chill run down my spine. The voice carried absolute confidence, the kind that came from someone who had faced death before and won. "You're making a mistake," the leader called back. "We have hostages. Stand down, or people will die." "You made the mistake," Marcus replied, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You came into my building, threatened my people, and you underestimated the quiet guy with the mop." The leader gestured to his remaining men, and they began moving toward the conference room where the hostages were being held. It was a smart tactical decision. Consolidate position, use human shields, force the enemy to come to them. But Marcus was already ahead of them. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, casting the office in eerie red shadows. In that brief moment of darkness, Marcus had moved again. When the dim light returned, he was positioned between the gunman and the conference room. "Last chance," he called out. "Walk away. Take the elevator to the lobby and leave. No one else needs to get hurt. You're one man," the leader shouted back. "We are professionals." "So was I," Marcus replied simply. What followed was unlike anything I'd ever seen outside of movies. Except this was real, happening 30 feet away from where I crouched in terror. Marcus moved through the office space like he owned it, using every piece of furniture, every shadow, every reflection in the windows to his advantage. The remaining gunmen were skilled, but they were fighting someone who understood their tactics better than they did. One by one, Marcus neutralized them. Not killed, I could see him deliberately choosing non-lethal takedowns, using pressure points and chokeholds that left his opponents unconscious but breathing. The leader was the last one standing, backing toward the conference room with his weapon raised. "I'll kill them," he threatened. I'll kill every person in that room if you come any closer. Marcus stepped into the open, his hands visible but ready. No, he said quietly. You won't. You think you know me? The leader snarled. You think you understand what I'm capable of? I know exactly what you're capable of, Marcus replied, still moving forward with calm confidence. You're former Spetsnaz, probably discharged for disciplinary problems. Your team is ex-military too, skilled but not elite. This was supposed to be a simple smash and grab for financial data, but you've let pride turn it into a confrontation you can't win. The leader's eyes widened slightly. How do you? Because I've been where you are, Marcus said, now within striking distance. The difference is, I learned when to stop fighting. The leader's finger tightened on the trigger, but Marcus was already moving. The weapon discharged into the ceiling as Marcus's hand closed around the man's wrist, twisting with precise force. The gun clattered to the floor as the leader cried out in pain. Marcus didn't stop there. His other hand struck a nerve cluster at the base of the man's neck, and the leader crumpled unconsciously to the floor. Silence settled over the office like a heavy blanket. Marcus stood among the scattered tactical gear and unconscious gunmen, his janitor's uniform torn but his breathing steady. He looked around at the employees who were beginning to emerge from their hiding spots, their faces showing a mixture of shock, relief, and something approaching awe. My phone buzzed one last time. It's over. You can come out now. I stumbled out of the break room on unsteady legs, Jennifer close behind me. The other employees were gathering around Marcus, thanking him, asking how he'd done it, treating him like the hero he'd apparently always been. Marcus deflected their questions with the same quiet humility he'd always shown, more concerned with making sure everyone was unharmed than accepting praise. He was checking on the unconscious gunmen, ensuring they were stable and securing their weapons. The police will be here soon, he said to the group. EMTs too. Anyone who's injured or in shock should sit down and wait for medical attention. I found myself walking toward him, my mind still struggling to process what I'd witnessed. This man I'd mocked and dismissed had just single-handedly neutralized a professional team of armed intruders. Marcus, I said, my voice barely audible, looked up from where he was checking the pulse of one of the unconscious men. Mr. Patterson, are you hurt? I shook my head, unable to find words. How do you apologize for months of disrespect to someone who just saved your life? I know you have questions, Marcus said, standing up. Everyone does. The truth is, I was Army Rangers, then Delta Force for 8 years. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I came home with more medals than I knew what to do with, and no idea how to live in a world where people weren't trying to kill me every day. He gestured around the office, at the normal workplace that had been transformed into a battlefield. I took this job because I wanted something simple, predictable, a place where the biggest crisis was running out of coffee filters or someone leaving dishes in the sink. I felt my face burning with shame. I'm sorry, I managed to say. I'm so sorry for everything, I said. Marcus studied me for a moment, then nodded. You weren't wrong about one thing, he said. The stories I told in the break room, most of them weren't true. My confusion must have shown on my face because he continued. The real stories aren't the kind you share over coffee. They're the ones that wake you up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. The ones that make you check locks twice and always sit with your back to the wall. The ones that teach you that sometimes the greatest victory is just making it through another day. Sirens were growing louder in the distance, emergency vehicles converging on our building. So why did you make up stories? I asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking around at our colleagues who were hugging each other, crying with relief, celebrating their survival. Because sometimes people need to believe that heroes exist, he said finally. Even if the heroes don't feel much like heroes themselves. The elevator chimed, and armed police officers emerged, weapons drawn. ready to face the threat that was already neutralized. Marcus raised his hands and identified himself, calmly explaining the situation while the unconscious gunmen were secured and removed. Over the next few hours, as we gave statements to investigators and tried to process what had happened, the full scope of Marcus's background became clear. He wasn't just former military, he was elite special operations, with commendations for valor and service that painted a picture of someone who had spent years protecting others at great personal cost. The attack had been exactly what Marcus suspected: corporate espionage, with the gunmen hired to steal sensitive financial data that could have impacted national security. Their mistake was assuming they were dealing with ordinary civilians. They hadn't counted on the quiet janitor who had been watching, learning, and preparing for the possibility that his two worlds might someday collide. 3 months later, our office had returned to something approaching normal routine. The company had hired new security, implemented better protocols, and offered counseling to anyone who needed it. Most employees had processed the trauma and moved on with their lives. Marcus still worked the late shift, still pushed his cart through the halls, still kept the building clean and safe. But everything was different now. People greeted him with genuine respect. New employees were told his story, not the made-up tales from the break room, but the real one, about the hero who had been hiding in plain sight. The company had offered him positions in security, consulting, even executive roles, but he declined them all. "This is where I belong," he told me when I asked about it. "Taking care of people, keeping things running smoothly. That's what gives me peace." I found myself stopping by to talk with him more often, not out of obligation or politeness, but because I genuinely valued his perspective. He'd seen more of the world's darkness than anyone should have to, yet he chose to spend his days creating order and safety in small, quiet ways. One evening, as I was working late, I came across Marcus in the break room. He was sitting alone, drinking coffee and reading a book on military history.